You've just got to cut them off. It's really that simple. If they're not somebody who makes you feel empowered, who is feeding your soul, who makes you feel safe, then it's really that simple. What's up, baddies, and welcome to another episode of the Arab and Thriving Show. I am your host, Rima, and today we're going to talk all about when and how to know it's the right time to cut someone off. If you're even asking yourself the question, there is a high chance that my recommendation is just going to be to cut this person off. It sounds very harsh. What we don't realize, though, is that it's not about them, it's not personal, it's purposeful. If the person in question is somebody who is not feeding your soul, if it's someone who is not adding to you, if it's someone who doesn't make you feel safe at bare minimum, then cut them off. If you feel like you are choosing between yourself and maintaining that relationship, so if that is a relationship that literally comes at the sacrifice of a healthy relationship between you and yourself, then you're going to have to cut them off. It's taken me several years to even get in front of you and talk about this because I carried a lot of guilt around making the decision to cut people off. This is not an easy decision, and it does come with a lot of sacrifice and even emotional baggage. But my story with this kind of starts when I lost my dad 5 years ago. It's a little over 5 years ago at this point, and my dad died suddenly. We were all just in shock, thinking you're going to wake up the next day and literally go to Costco with your dad. We thought it was going to be like the first day he'd be allowed out of the house after his surgery, but only to realize that whatever it was went wrong and he had a heart attack that night and died pretty much suddenly. During that phase of my life, I was in a 4+ year on and off toxic situationship. I won't even call it a relationship because I don't even know that we really ever called it that. And this was someone who I tried to break up with and move on from over and over and over again. And it was kind of like this toxic, emotionally abusive cycle of me just kind of always going back into that relationship. And I don't know about you, but when you have a toxic relationship, you kind of like collect a toxic group of friends just as a byproduct of being in that relationship. You start becoming friends with their friends, your friend groups start hanging out. And so the relationship gets harder and harder to let go of because now you've created kind of this web of other people that you would have to kind of get rid of if you were to break up with that person, or at least the nature of your relationship with those people would probably have to change. And so prior to my dad passing, I wasn't really in a place to let go of that relationship and therefore those people in my life almost immediately. Like when I tell you, almost immediately after that night that my dad passed, it was a crazy 2 weeks after that because we're Muslim. My dad wanted to be buried in Lebanon. There's different procedures when you're Muslim where you have to bury the body within, I think it's 48 hours. And we had to fly to Lebanon. We had to go to a bunch of the services in Lebanon. There were services that we did first in the States, and then they do a 40-day service. There was just a lot going on. And then in between that, you don't really have downtime because people are constantly coming in and out of your house to pay their respects and to support the family. And so we were just in over our heads in grief, in over our heads with shock and all of the emotions that come with that. And if you've ever lost a parent, I'm not actually going to speak on your behalf. I'll just speak on my behalf. For me, losing a parent was like losing your breath, losing this supply of oxygen that you had grown so accustomed to for decades, and feeling like you need to hurry up and try to, I don't even want to say replace it because there is no replacing it, but kind of supplement that breathing from somewhere else. For me, that meant getting involved in things or people or spaces or whatever that just fed me, made me feel hopeful, made me feel grateful, made me feel faithful, made me feel more connected to God. And so just almost immediately, like within a snap of a finger, it was like I couldn't really breathe anymore. So it immediately exposed people whose energy was serving as a toxin for me. I don't even want to go so far as to say they're necessarily toxic people, because I just believe everyone can kind of be a toxic energy source for someone else, intentionally or unintentionally. And I think the reason I have no problem telling you, just cut them off. If you're asking yourself, if this is a friend, if this is a relationship, and you feel like the energy is something that is not elevating you, is something that is toxic for you to consume for whatever reason, this life is short and it is not a personal thing against that person. You don't need to say bad things about them. You don't need to say bad things to them. You don't need to create a story where you're the victim and they're the abuser. Like, you don't need to do that. You just need to make the decision that is ultimately going to give you that oxygen and help you breathe lighter. So I basically cut several people off during that time period without really having an explanation. Like, it's not like I could be like, hey guys, I'm grieving my dad, and it just so happens that in grief, you can't really afford to be around any type of energy. You need to be around premium energy. You know how like you're filling your car? I'm thinking of like filling your gas tank and only filling your car with like premium, right? You can't just I can't fill my tank with energy that could be toxic or energy that's not like top notch. I need to try to replace what I've lost, the love that I've lost, the support, the safety net that I've lost. And I need to be around people and things, and even in my own space, I need to preserve the energy and filter and purify the energy in my own space. And for that reason, we can't be friends anymore. Like, obviously, I didn't have that language. So what I did have though is when I made that decision, and it was again very instinctive, when I just kind of drifted naturally from those people, I literally felt lighter. Like, on one hand, on a rational level, I felt guilty. So I'm like, man, like, I don't want to look like a sellout. I don't want to look like I'm not a good friend. I don't want to look like a bad person. So that's all my mind working and kind of creating judgments against what I was doing. And other people echoed those judgments. I had friends in my life who were like, how are you just going to cut people off? Like, you owe them more than that. I don't owe anybody anything and nobody owes you anything. So that's just my opinion now. But I think there were a lot of people in my life who maybe felt they didn't have the permission to do that for themselves. So they judged me for making that, in their mind, rash, harsh decision. So again, on the rational level, I felt like this is just really mean. On the spiritual and even emotional level, I felt literally lighter. And as soon as I realized, like, God wouldn't be gifting me with this feeling of lightness and with this alignment and with this just better mental health if this wasn't an aligned decision. I think God is giving me, and I think God will give you, the instant gratification in just feeling lighter the next morning. You're not going to feel the instant gratification of not missing that person or not wanting to text that person, or you're not going to feel the instant gratification of not feeling lonely. Like, there will be a lot of sacrifices when you cut people off who are not meant to be in your life, but you will feel the instant gratification of literally feeling lighter and getting that like really clear affirmation that the decision you made was one that is going to be best for you in the long run. If you are watching this video and still kind of contemplating whether or not it's the right time to drift away from a friendship, to break up with a toxic relationship, you know, to set bigger and better boundaries with family members even, then chances are it is time, like right now, like yesterday, like a year ago. It takes a lot of courage, and I really want to honor that. I also want to talk through the resistance around this phrase of cutting people off. It sounds very harsh, even like thinking about it metaphorically, it sounds harsh. The reality is it's just not personal. When you think about drifting from a relationship or intentionally kind of cutting it off, it should not be with the assumption that you're better than that person. That's when it could be offensive. And that's not about cutting people off, that's about arrogance. So let's not conflate the two. Cutting people off does not mean that you think you're better than them. Cutting people off doesn't mean that they're going to stay where they're at and you're going to leave them behind and live this amazing, purposeful life. No. If you believe that God has something amazing for you, then you have to also believe God has something amazing for them. And if you believe that you are incompatible with them, that is all it takes to know that you need to cut someone off. If you believe that you are incompatible with this person as a friend, as a lover, as whatever it is, then they are also incompatible with you. Your cutting them off, or the lack of you in their life, is also better for them. So really try to remove your ego from this process. You're not cutting someone off because they're basic and you're elevated. No, You're cutting somebody off because you are not compatible, or you have discovered or felt, or your intuition is telling you that the journey has kind of ended for your relationships, which means that they have an awesome journey to embark on without you, or maybe with you at a very later stage, who knows. So I just want to make that clear, because I think a lot of the harshness around it kind of comes from arrogance. You kind of feel guilty cutting someone off because you low-key think you're better than them, and you feel like cutting them off will show them that you think you're better than them. So check yourself if those are your intentions, whether it's your ex, whether it's a best friend. You're not better than them. You're just not made for each other. And one of you has to kind of make that decision so that you both can go off on your amazing journeys and do what it is that you're meant to do. Nobody owes anyone anything. There was never a moment in time, I don't know about you, where I sat down and wrote a contract with someone like, we are going to be best friends until the end of time. The only non-negotiables that will breach this contract is if you kill my family member, or if I say something bad about you publicly, or like, no, there's like no contract ever written to state that I need to stay best friends with somebody, or close with somebody, or in a even relationship. The only contract that I'm probably going to sign to keep a relationship in my life is when Ahmed and I get legally married. Like, and then at that point, yeah, I'm going to do my absolute best, and he's going to do his absolute best to make sure we are honoring the terms of that agreement. But even then, stuff happens, and I'm not even going to be out here putting that energy into my love life. But with friendships, people grow, people change. There is no literal like physical agreement. You should be a great person. You should be honest. You should be accountable. You should do the inner work. That's what you owe to yourself, though. And that will automatically benefit other people in your life. But you don't owe anyone anything, and nobody owes you anything. Don't make the mistake of staying in a certain relationship just because you feel like you owe them your time. You owe them this level of commitment to the relationship. You're supposed to grow, you're supposed to change, you're supposed to reevaluate everything in your space. And it's all love regardless. Like, even if you make the decision that somebody isn't best for you at this point in your life, that should come from a place of love. It should still come from a place of love, where you're able to wish the best for them, really, but understand that you want to be intentional and purposeful about your life, and continuing on in a relationship that isn't serving you, or isn't making you feel safe, or isn't adding to where you're trying to go, is a decision that you should feel free to make unapologetically. So now it begs the huge question of, how do I do this? Sounds good. We're all aligned. You're ready to do it. You might even have a specific person in mind. How do you do it? You do it by being honest. You do it by being honest. The only exception to that rule, I would say, is if you are in an abusive relationship. I'm not a licensed therapist, so I would recommend, if you are in an abusive relationship and you're trying to figure out how to cut that person off, I think it looks a little differently than just being extremely honest. I'll actually tell you a little bit about how I got out of my abusive relationship. My role in that could have been very toxic too, and it might have not been the best for my mental health. But with everybody else, my policy is to just be as honest as you can at that moment, and, explain what you feel safe explaining, explain what you feel comfortable explaining. At the time when I was drifting from some of my friends, I didn't have much language to explain that I'm in grief, and I'm, trying really hard to just salvage any ounce of mental health that I had. But what I did know to explain, and what I did try to explain, is that I still love the person or the people that I'm moving on from. I still care about them. It's not personal. There's nothing wrong with you. People are still going to go through their own healing journey. They might even grieve that friendship or relationship. And that is not your responsibility. It's actually not helpful for you to help somebody grieve the loss of you when you're trying to create that distance. So the policy that I would say is, try to be as forthcoming and honest and transparent about what you need, and focus it on your needs, and ultimately the fact that you think this is a decision that is best for your mental health. I was in my toxic relationship. Anytime I would try to be a little bit honest about the fact that I wanted to move on, that person would just kind of like pull out all the stops. Now, if you are with someone who is emotionally abusive or who has narcissistic tendencies, it is very common for them to try to do the most when they feel like they're losing you. Like they're not doing anything cute or nice or sweet or loving until they feel like you're trying to move on. And then they need to bring you back into their orbit. And then they being their same old kind of blah, abusive self. Right. So I noticed that pattern again for 4+ years. And I'd been trying to kind of get out of that person's orbit, but kept kind of like finding myself back into that magnetic energy. And I knew it wasn't best for me. And again, as soon as my dad died, I'm like, oh no, I just lost this really, really, really strong, safe, masculine energy in my life. I'm not about to kill myself by continuing on with this extremely toxic. And I actually think the only reason I stayed in that relationship for so long and could withstand it is because the love that I had through the men in my life, like my dad and my brothers, was such a overall very healthy, loving, safe bond that I could kind of afford to BS a little bit with this toxic relationship. But as soon as I lost that main source of like that male presence in my life that made me feel safe, it became really clear that I was going to be in danger if I stayed in that very toxic, not loving, very draining relationship. I wrote a pact to myself. I wrote myself a letter. I told myself that I know it's going to be hard. I know it's going to be really, really, really challenging, but I love myself enough to get through the days where I want to text that person, where I want to call them, or I want to see them, or I felt really vulnerable. And I really owe it to myself to not use them as a crutch, especially during this time. I'm stronger than that. I can get through it on my own. I really believe God doesn't put us in situations that we can't get through. And so I had to really rely on that faith. So I wrote myself like a really reassuring letter. But then here's what I think was the real game changer. I listed out, I literally bulleted out like a crazy person, every single thing that could get in the way, every barrier that could potentially pull me back into that space, and how I was going to handle it. So it was to the point of like, if he texts you, once he feels you drifting, he's going to text you and tell you to come over. Tell him that you're busy studying with your GMAT. You might be like, why are you even responding to him? I knew that during the first couple of months, the whole no contact rule would actually make it harder for me, because if I was just to go cold turkey and not respond, it would like create red flags with him really quickly. And then the stops that he would pull would be so drastic earlier on. And I wasn't strong enough during that time period to not give in to if he was sending all these flowers to my house or pulling up to my house. He's going all the way out of his way to try to get my attention. I knew the first couple of months I needed to buy myself that time to build my strength so that once he did realize that I was moving on, I was already strong enough. So during the first couple of months, it was very important for me to respond. So I didn't give him that feeling that I was like completely gone, but it was in my head that I was completely gone. There were things like if he texts you or if he calls you, you know, respond, but like make an excuse, constantly make an excuse. If he tries to do this, make sure that you are busy doing that. During the weekdays, make sure you go to the gym at a different time, because we would always go to the gym around the same time. And I know it sounds crazy, but I just knew myself so well. And I knew that I was standing in my own way of moving on from that relationship. And that in order to move on completely and kind of cut off the most toxic energy in my life at that point, it really required me to do something I'd never done before and literally outline every single possibility and how I was going to combat that possibility with something else. One big thing that I did write on that list is losing contact with his friends. I was friends with a lot of his friends, and as much as I loved them and really, developed my own relationship with them, it was, again, it was a choice of like, okay, well, them or you. I know you like them, but you can't have both right now. It's them or you. And so I chose me over and over and over and over. And it was definitely very hard, but my plan was working. I had kind of thought through everything. And sure enough, he did not really notice, because guys, until I would say a month and a half in. And at that point, I was just convinced. Like I was convinced, and I did not, while I did kind of keep some communication until I finally had to like block him completely, I was like only taking steps forward. And so even if I took 10 steps forward and took 2 steps back, I was never doing something where I was taking 10 steps forward and 20 steps back. It was definitely not linear. But when you are caught in an abusive relationship, you can't hope for linear when you're trying to get out of it. You could just hope for like little dips, but by the end of it, you're like completely out and thriving. I don't regret anything during that time. I go back and I would do it exactly the way that I did it. And I don't say that about a lot of things. There are not, I don't have regrets, but most of the time when I say I would go back and do things for the most part exactly the same, like it's very rare that I look back and I'm like, no, no, because I'm very critical, I'm very honest, I'm very accountable. I go back and I said, with what I knew at that time, with what I knew, not what I know today. Of course, if I went back with what I know today, I would have a lot more boundaries. I would have been more clear. I wouldn't have even been in that relationship. But with what I know, what I knew at that point in time and where I was at with my mental health, I'm just so, so proud and amazed by my ability to make a decision despite the guilt that I was feeling, despite the guilt that other people were making me feel, and just do what was best for myself. You can do it. If you're watching this video, it's because you have been thinking about that. You've been considering, certain relationships that maybe need to go. As someone on the other side of having this skill, because it is a skill of realizing, wow, this is an amazing friendship. This is an amazing relationship, or this is a really bad relationship. But what I want is different. And this doesn't seem like it's aligned with that, at least today. So let me just be forthcoming and real and do what is best for myself, because once again, it is not personal, it's purposeful. So I really hope that was helpful. I love you all so, so, so much. Just remember that you need to do it with love. I mean, you don't need to do anything. You could do whatever you want. But I would hope that the message that you're getting from this is that however you release people in your life or even embrace new people, it is with love. It's not with arrogance. It's not with toxicity, it's not with abusiveness, it's with love. I love myself so much that I'm going to choose only what's best for me. And therefore, I'm doing this person and myself a disservice if I keep someone around, if that is not what's best for me. And I trust in God or whoever you believe in that if that is not what's best for me, then that's also not what is best for that person. Let me know below. Do you want to hear more about this? Do you want to hear more about the toxic relationship piece? Is it a toxic friendship? I would just love to hear kind of what brought you here and what is on your mind. But until next time, baddies, thank you for watching.